Since the beginning of humanity, wine has always been connected to the divine. In Egypt, it was offered to the gods and consumed by pharaohs as a sacred elixir. In Greece, the initiates of the mysteries of Dionysus drank a secret mixture to transcend the limits of reality. In Christianity, it became the very blood of Christ, carrying such powerful symbolism that it was incorporated into rituals until today. But why has this substance, in particular, always been present in occult ceremonies, initiatory cults, and secret societies? What is the real meaning behind this millennial tradition? The transformation of water into wine was Jesus's first miracle. But why? If the goal was to demonstrate his divine power, why not start with something more grandiose, like healing a sick person or resurrecting a dead one? What does this act really represent? We know that, throughout history, wine has been treated as a symbol of transmutation and power. Could this miracle be a hidden message, understood only by those who possess knowledge forgotten by time? Since antiquity, symbols have always been used to convey hidden messages, understood only by those who were prepared to see beyond the surface. The transformation of water into wine is not just a miraculous account, but an event full of meanings that surpass literal comprehension. In the esoteric view, water represents the primitive state of human consciousness, pure, but without defined form. Wine, on the other hand, symbolizes transformation, the elevation of the soul, spiritual refinement. This change occurs not only on the physical plane but also within the being itself. But can this transmutation be applied to the very nature of reality? Medieval alchemists believed that all elements of nature could be transmuted. At the heart of alchemy, we find the quest for the opus magnum, the great work, which aimed to transform base metals into gold. But the masters of this art knew that true gold was not material. It was spiritual enlightenment, the ascension of the soul. For them, water symbolized the initial stage of the journey, while wine represented the culmination of the process. When Jesus transforms water into wine, he is not just altering the composition of a liquid. He is demonstrating, in coded form, that matter and spirit can be elevated through knowledge and will. In the Hermetic tradition, this transmutation is directly linked to the ability to elevate consciousness. Hermes Trismegistus, a central figure in ancient esotericism, taught that, as above, so below, a principle suggesting that internal transformation reflects external transformation. If water can become wine, can our essence also be refined until reaching a superior state? Was this miracle of Jesus a disguised alchemical teaching? Curiously, this concept is not exclusive to Christianity. In various ancient traditions, water was always associated with raw matter, while wine was a symbol of divinity. In Egypt, wine was used in initiation rituals and temples, representing the moment when the initiate abandoned their ignorance and became a knower of sacred mysteries. Among the Greeks, the figure of Dionysus, the god of wine and transcendence, was associated with ecstasy and the liberation of spirit from the bonds of mundane reality. In Orphic rituals, wine was ingested as a means of communication with the divine, a portal to other dimensions of consciousness. Modern science also raises interesting questions about this symbolism. Research shows that water has a molecular structure that can be altered by frequencies and intentions. Japanese scientist Masaru Emoto conducted experiments demonstrating that water reacts to words, emotions, and vibrations. If water can change its structure through external stimuli, wouldn't this suggest that the transmutation of water into wine could have been something much deeper than a simple supernatural act? Could this miracle be revealing hidden knowledge about the very nature of reality? Another fascinating interpretation comes from the Kabbalistic tradition. In Jewish mysticism, each element of the physical world has a spiritual equivalent. Water is linked to the element Chesed, which represents mercy and unlimited potential. Wine, on the other hand, is associated with Gevura, the power of transformation and discipline. When Jesus transforms water into wine, he is, symbolically, demonstrating the fusion of these principles, creating a perfect balance between divine goodness and justice. Furthermore, there is a curious detail in the biblical account that many people ignore. The wine produced by Jesus was of superior quality to what had been served before. In John 2:10 we read, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." Why was this detail recorded? In esoteric symbolism, This suggests that the transformation operated by Jesus was not just a change of state, it was an evolution, an improvement. This connects directly with the idea of spiritual alchemy, where transmutation occurs not only through change of form but through elevation of quality. The later Christian tradition assimilated this concept and expanded it. In the sacrament of the Eucharist, wine comes to be treated as the very blood of Christ, the divine essence that he offers to humanity. This is another indication that the transmutation of water into wine is not a simple casual miracle, but a revelation of something much greater. But was this knowledge understood in its totality? Or did part of this secret get lost with time? Another intriguing aspect is the choice of marriage as the setting for this event. In many mystical traditions, marriage symbolizes the union of the divine with the human, of matter with spirit, of common consciousness with enlightenment. The presence of Mary, Jesus' mother, is also not an irrelevant detail. In esoteric tradition, the maternal figure often represents hidden wisdom, the one who guides the initiate on the path of truth. Does the inclusion of Mary in this narrative suggest that this miracle was, in fact, a disguised spiritual initiation? We cannot forget that water is one of the most ancient and fundamental elements of creation. In Genesis, the Spirit of God hovers over the waters before giving form to the world. Water represents infinite potential, the primordial substance from which everything emerges. When Jesus transforms water into wine, he is, in a way, showing that divine potential can be materialized into something higher, a fundamental principle of spiritual alchemy. If we analyze the historical and religious context, we realize that this transmutation was not something completely unprecedented. Ancient mystics already spoke about the transformation of the soul as a process similar to the maturation of wine, something that requires time, patience, and the combination of correct elements. But is humanity ready to understand this secret? Is this knowledge still available, hidden in the symbols and traditions of initiatory societies? The question that remains is, what if this miracle was not just an act of kindness, but a sign for those who knew how to interpret its true essence? Throughout history, certain substances have been treated as sacred, reserved only for those initiated in occult mysteries. Wine is one of them. It is no coincidence that it appears in religious rituals, secret societies, and spiritual ceremonies for millennia. But what really makes wine such a powerful element? Its physical effect? Its symbolism? Or something that escapes common understanding? Among the Greeks, wine was much more than a simple drink. In the mysteries of Dionysus, one of the most secret traditions of ancient Greece, participants ingested a wine prepared with special ingredients, whose exact formula was never revealed. The goal: to expand consciousness and transcend the limits of human perception. The initiates claimed that by drinking this sacred substance, they were able to make contact with the divine and access knowledge that was beyond common reality. This ritualistic wine was considered a portal, a means of communication with the gods. The Egyptians also seemed to understand this secret. Wine was reserved only for priests and pharaohs, being used in specific rituals within the temples. Archaeological studies show that Egyptian wine was often mixed with herbs and resins, creating a composition that could have both spiritual and hallucinogenic effects. This raises an intriguing question. Was the wine used in ancient ceremonies very different from what we know today? Could it contain ingredients that facilitated access to elevated states of consciousness? The Romans inherited these traditions and incorporated them into the Mithraic cults, a mysterious religion that competed with Christianity in the first centuries. Mithraism had secret rituals that involved the consumption of wine, always linked to the idea of sacrifice, rebirth, and connection with higher forces. Most curious is that Mithras was often portrayed in a ritual supper, where wine was drunk as a symbol of the union between the initiates and the solar god. Does this remind you of something? In Christianity, wine assumes a central role in the Eucharist. Jesus not only transformed water into wine in Cana, but, at his Last Supper, declared that wine was his own blood. The doctrine of transubstantiation, accepted by the Catholic Church, states that consecrated wine literally becomes the blood of Christ during Mass. But where did this idea come from? Could it have roots in much older traditions, like the Dionysian and Mithraic rituals? Secret societies seem to have understood something that most people ignore. The Knights Templar, an order of warrior monks who gained fame for their occult knowledge, had ceremonies where wine was ingested ritualistically. Some scholars suggest that the Templars might have discovered secrets about the true meaning of wine while they were in the Middle East, where they had contact with Muslim and Jewish esoteric traditions. There are rumors that the Templars knew of a secret substance added to wine, something that could provoke altered states of consciousness and allow spiritual visions. The Freemasons and Rosicrucians, two of the most influential initiatory orders in history, also used wine in their rituals. But here there is an interesting detail. In some degrees of Freemasonry, wine symbolizes not only the blood of the masters who came before, but a type of elixir that connects the initiate to ancestral knowledge. The Rosicrucians spoke of the wine of the philosophers, a mystical substance related to the philosopher's stone and spiritual immortality. But what exactly would this special wine be? There are also indications that some of these esoteric orders used secret compositions, mixing wine with herbs or resins that enhanced its effects. In the 16th century, alchemists tried to recreate formulas supposedly inspired by ancient texts, seeking a wine capable of opening the eyes of the spirit. If this is true, then perhaps the wine of ancient rituals was not just a symbolic representation, but a real instrument of consciousness transformation. And here another fascinating question arises. The Church always tried to limit and control the use of wine in rituals outside the liturgical environment. In the Middle Ages, groups that performed secret ceremonies involving wine were persecuted and labeled as heretics. The Cathars, for example, believed that wine possessed a hidden meaning that the Church did not want to be revealed. But why? What did these orders know about wine that made them targets of persecution? On the scientific plane, we know that wine contains chemical compounds that can alter perception. Some shamanic traditions, for example, mixed wine with certain plants to create an effect that facilitated contact with spiritual realities. Wine was seen as a channel between worlds, something that could open the doors of perception and allow the initiate to see beyond the illusion of matter. If we return to Jesus' first miracle, we can look at the transformation of water into wine from a new perspective. If wine is a symbol of transmutation and spiritual enlightenment, then this miracle might have been a hidden sign that humanity was still in the water phase, that is, in a primitive state of consciousness, and that, in due time, this consciousness could be transformed. But only for those who were prepared. If so many ancient cultures and secret societies treated wine as something sacred, could there be knowledge that was deliberately hidden from the public? Could the true power of wine be related to something we still don't understand? The Bible records various miracles of Jesus, but the transformation of water into wine was the first. If we think about it, this is a curious detail. If the intention was simply to demonstrate his divine power, wouldn't it have been more impressive to heal a sick person, resurrect a dead person, or calm a storm? Why did he choose a wedding and the lack of wine as the setting to inaugurate his mission? Nothing in Jesus' ministry happens by chance. Each gesture, symbol, and word carries deep meanings, often hidden from those who don't know where to look. The fact that this miracle occurred at a wedding is not irrelevant. Marriage, in practically all spiritual traditions, represents the union between the divine and the human, between heaven and earth, between common consciousness and enlightenment. This event wasn't just a celebration, but a symbol of something much greater. In the biblical account, there is an even more intriguing detail: the presence of Mary, Jesus' mother. She is the one who notices the lack of wine and, even before Jesus acts, tells the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." John 2:5. This statement suggests that Mary knew Jesus was capable of something extraordinary, as if she were signaling that this moment was a kind of initiation. But what exactly was being initiated? Another interesting point is that Jesus doesn't just transform water into wine. He transforms it into a wine superior to what had been served before. The master of the feast, upon tasting the drink, says to the bridegroom, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now."
John 2,10.
This phrase, seemingly simple at first glance, might contain a coded message. In esoteric tradition, the good wine represents sacred knowledge, the hidden wisdom that is only revealed at the right moment. The fact that Jesus presents this wine at the end, not at the beginning of the feast, might be an indication that true knowledge is not delivered immediately. It is reserved for those who are prepared to receive it. If we look at this story through the lens of alchemy, we notice another pattern. In alchemy, the transformation of raw matter into gold is a metaphor for the evolution of the soul. The alchemical process occurs in stages, passing from the raw material, water, to a refined state, wine. Was Jesus demonstrating that material reality can be molded and elevated through hidden knowledge? The Kabbalah, one of Judaism's oldest mystical systems, also offers an interesting reading of this event. In Kabbalistic tradition, water is associated with the Sephira Chesed, which represents mercy, raw, and unlimited potential. Wine, on the other hand, is related to the Sephira Gevura, which symbolizes power, discipline, and the structuring of reality. When Jesus transforms water into wine, he is not just performing a miracle. He is uniting these two principles, creating a cosmic balance. But there is an even more impressive detail in this story. John 2:6 mentions that the water transformed into wine was stored in 6 stone jars, which were used in Jewish purification rituals. Why was this information recorded? 6 is a highly symbolic number. In esotericism, it represents the union between the material world and the spiritual world. In some interpretations, this number is also linked to man, since, according to Genesis, humanity was created on the 6th day. The choice of these jars might be an indication that this transformation was not just physical, but spiritual, a sign that something new was beginning. Another interesting aspect is the role of the servants. Jesus doesn't touch the jars, doesn't put his hands in the water. He simply gives an instruction: fill the jars with water. John 2:7. This means that the transformation doesn't happen directly, but through a command. This pattern repeats in other Bible passages. When Jesus resurrects Lazarus, he just orders, "Lazarus, come out."
John 11,43.
This suggests that his true authority wasn't just in the act itself, but in the knowledge of the laws that govern reality. This aspect of the word as a tool of creation goes back to concepts present in the very genesis of the Bible. In Genesis 1, God creates the world just by speaking, "Let there be light." This indicates that there is a hidden power in vibration, sound, and the intention behind words. If Jesus had access to this knowledge, was the transformation of water into wine more than a simple miracle? Could it have been a demonstration of the workings of nature's hidden laws? Furthermore, it's worth noting that Jesus never made this miracle a spectacle. Unlike other moments when his deeds were public and grandiose, this transformation occurs discreetly, almost hidden. Only the servants and Mary know that something extraordinary happened. Why? Was this miracle a coded message, understood only by those who were spiritually ready? Many esoteric traditions argue that Jesus possessed knowledge that wasn't recorded in the official Gospels. There are hypotheses that he had spent years studying hidden mysteries in Egypt, Persia, or even India. Some apocryphal manuscripts suggest that he had mastery over the secrets of matter and energy, something that only the great spiritual masters understood. If this is true, then the transformation of water into wine might not have been a simple miracle, but a clue. A sign left for those who were capable of seeing beyond the words and understanding that reality is much more moldable than we imagine. What was Jesus really trying to teach us with this event? Throughout history, certain knowledge has always been kept away from the masses, reserved only for those who had the power or influence to access it. Among this hidden knowledge, one of the most intriguing involves wine, not just as a spiritual symbol, but as a substance that would have been used by secret societies and elites for purposes that go far beyond religious communion. But what exactly was hidden behind this ritualistic use? Did wine have some property that affected the mind and perception, facilitating elevated spiritual states? The Knights Templar are one of the first groups to be associated with hidden secrets involving wine. During the Crusades, the Templars spent years in the Middle East, where they had contact with cultures and esoteric knowledge that had never been accessed by Europeans. Some theories suggest that they would have discovered ancient manuscripts containing formulas to create a special wine, mixed with herbs or unknown substances, capable of altering states of consciousness. This wine, according to speculation, could have been used in secret rituals of the order, in initiation ceremonies where members reached expanded perceptions of reality. There are historical records that the Templars performed rites of spiritual elevation in underground locations and hidden temples, where wine was consumed in a ritualistic context, away from the eyes of the church. Had they discovered something that the church wanted to keep secret? Another society that seems to have understood the hidden power of wine were medieval alchemists. For them, wine was not just a drink, but an essential element in the process of spiritual transmutation. Many alchemists spoke of a wine of the philosophers, a mystical liquid associated with the philosopher's stone and the immortality of the soul. Some texts suggest that this wine could contain substances capable of activating certain parts of the brain or provoking experiences of contact with higher realities. But these compositions were kept secret and, over time, disappeared from historical records. In Freemasonry, wine appears in various initiatory degrees, always linked to the concept of enlightenment. In some Masonic lodges, there are rituals where wine is served in symbolic chalices, representing the initiate's connection to a lineage of ancestral knowledge. But the greatest peculiarity lies in the older rituals of operative masonry, where wine was not just drunk, it was used in ceremonies to consecrate spaces, marking places of power. This suggests that wine, beyond its physical effect, was seen as an energetic conductor, capable of influencing the environment and the minds of participants. The Rosicrucians, a mystical society that claimed to possess occult knowledge from ancient Egypt, also treated wine as something much more complex than just a drink. According to their teachings, wine carried specific vibrational properties that could be activated through rituals and words of power. There are references in Rosicrucian texts about consecrated wines, used to expand the mind and facilitate spiritual visions. But perhaps one of the most intriguing mysteries involving wine is linked to the Holy Grail. For centuries, seekers tried to discover what exactly this sacred chalice was. For some, it was just the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper. But for others, the Holy Grail would be a code for secret knowledge about the true power of wine. There are theories suggesting that the Grail was not a physical object, but rather an esoteric doctrine that revealed how consciousness could be transformed, just as water becomes wine. And here an intriguing question arises. If so many secret societies treated wine as something so special, what really differentiated these ritualistic wines from common wine? Were certain formulas created throughout history and then lost, erased from records to prevent this knowledge from becoming accessible to the public? We know that some cultures developed very specific practices involving wine and altered states of consciousness. Greek and Roman shamans, for example, mixed wine with certain herbs to create a substance that induced mystical experiences. In Eleusis, one of the most important spiritual centers of ancient Greece, there was a ritual where initiates drank a mysterious liquid, described as a sacred wine, and soon after entered a state of profound enlightenment. These rituals were so secret that anyone who revealed their details was condemned to death. But why? What was in this wine that needed to be kept in absolute secrecy? Some researchers believe that there were variants of wine that contained natural psychoactive compounds, capable of opening doors to higher states of perception. In the Middle Ages, this knowledge was suppressed by the Church, and any group that preserved it was accused of heresy. This would explain why so many orders that used wine in their rituals ended up being persecuted. The most curious thing is that, in the modern world, this tradition has not completely disappeared. Some discrete orders still perform ceremonies where consecrated wine is treated as a special elixir, charged with energy and prepared according to ancient rituals. But do these practices really preserve lost knowledge? If wine has always been present in circles of power and among those who hold occult knowledge, does it still today hide a secret that has not been fully revealed? Wine has always been present in Christian rituals, but its most mysterious role emerges at the Last Supper. It was at this moment that Jesus took a chalice, looked at his disciples and said, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." Matthew 26, 27, 28. This phrase marks one of Christianity's most enigmatic moments. Why did Jesus choose wine specifically to represent his blood? Was it merely symbolism or something much deeper? Throughout history, various religious and esoteric traditions have spoken about the concept of sacred blood. Blood has always been treated as the essence of life, the substance that carries vital energy and the identity of a being. In the Bible, blood plays a fundamental role in numerous rituals, from sacrifices in the Old Testament to Christ's crucifixion. But what if the wine at the Last Supper wasn't just a representation of blood, but rather a key to hidden knowledge about the divine nature of human beings? In Kabbalah, wine and blood are intimately connected. The Hebrew word for wine, yain, has the numerical value of 70, the same as sod, which means mystery. In other words, since ancient times, wine was already associated with a hidden secret. For Kabbalists, Drinking the right wine in a ritualistic context could lead to enlightenment and contact with higher planes of existence. This suggests that when Jesus declared the wine was his blood, he could have been transmitting a code about the transmutation of human essence into something divine. Transubstantiation, a central doctrine of the Catholic Church, affirms that the wine of the Eucharist is not just a symbol, but literally becomes Christ's blood during the Mass ritual. This idea has parallels with ancient pagan beliefs, such as Dionysian rituals, where initiates consumed a sacred drink believing they were absorbing the god's essence. But was this idea of ingesting divine blood really created in Christianity, or was it a much older concept that was reinterpreted? Another intriguing detail is that some esoteric Christian traditions suggest that the blood of Christ doesn't refer only to the physical liquid, but to a sacred lineage. The Cathars, a medieval Christian sect considered heretical by the Church, believed that Jesus came not only to offer spiritual salvation but to preserve secret knowledge about a royal lineage, whose descendants carried special blood, endowed with unique spiritual properties. This theory was reinforced centuries later by researchers who suggested that the Holy Grail might not be a physical chalice, but a code for this bloodline. The word Grail, in an ancient esoteric reading, could derive from sang real, meaning royal blood. This means that the true secret of the Last Supper might not be in the wine itself, but in the idea that Christ was transmitting a genetic or spiritual inheritance that should be preserved. But is this just a fanciful theory, or is there evidence for it? Curiously, some ancient traditions speak of sacred substances that could modify the body and spirit of those who ingested them. In ancient Egypt, there were legends about an elixir of life, a drink that conferred vitality and connection with the gods. In India, Vedic texts mention soma, a sacred liquid that provided enlightenment. Some of these traditions speak of drinks that not only represented something sacred but contained secret components that transformed those who consumed them. Did the wine used by Jesus at the Last Supper have something special? Could it contain substances that facilitated elevated states of consciousness? This hypothesis becomes even more interesting when we look at the first centuries of Christianity. The Gnostics, a group of mystical Christians who were persecuted and eliminated by the official church, believed that Jesus' teachings contained secrets about the nature of reality and the human spirit. Some Gnostic texts speak of a sacred wine that was not just a symbol, but a means of spiritual transformation. This leads us to a disturbing question. Did the Church, over the centuries, erase or hide part of the true meaning of Christ's wine and blood? If there was more than simple symbolism at the Last Supper, why were so many groups that tried to reinterpret this teaching persecuted? And furthermore, if wine was seen as the blood of Christ and represented a new covenant with God, was this covenant fully understood? Or was there a secret buried in this story that was never completely revealed? Throughout history, humanity's greatest secrets were never left in plain sight. They have always been hidden in symbols, coded texts, and secret rituals, accessible only to those who had the right knowledge to interpret them. Wine, since ancient times, has been one of these secrets. But why? If it were just a common drink, why would it be present in Egyptian rituals, Greek ceremonies, Mithraic cults, Templar initiations, and even Christianity? The answer may lie in the relationship between wine and human consciousness. Some occultist traditions suggest that true sacred wine was not what we know today, but rather a special formula that altered perception and expanded the mind. What if this tradition had never disappeared? We know that Templars, Freemasons, and Rosicrucians preserved rituals involving wine, and there are indications that these rituals were not merely symbolic ceremonies. Some sources suggest that the composition of these wines was altered with herbs and substances capable of inducing elevated states of consciousness. In the ancient mysteries of Eleusis in Greece, initiates drank a special wine before experiencing profound visions about the nature of the universe. Was this knowledge lost, or was it hidden? Modern science reinforces this suspicion. Research shows that certain natural substances can activate areas of the brain linked to memory, intuition, and extrasensory perception. Some cultures preserve this knowledge, but the church and other institutions eliminated any group that dared to explore it. But did the elites really destroy this secret or just keep it for themselves? There are indications that small, discrete circles still use wine as a vehicle to access higher mental and spiritual states. Some families and discrete societies preserve practices linked to consecrated wine, claiming that the ancient formulas were never lost. They were just removed from public reach. And here arises the big question. If this knowledge was erased from history for common humanity, Who is using it today? If the elites understood that wine could be a tool to modify the perception of reality and connect to something greater, is this secret still being applied in modern rituals, away from public eyes? And if so, for what purpose? If for centuries wine was treated as a sacred element that led to higher knowledge, then the final question is, what else might have been hidden from us? And now I want to hear from you. What other spiritual topics would you like to see here? Leave your suggestion in the comments and help shape the channel's next content. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected some videos for you that are full of deep knowledge and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step to transforming your reality.